What we're doing today is looking at the controls that go in the first panel of the 3 panels in the split panel display that I created in the last video. And these 3 controls are 2 radio buttons and a checkbox. And in order to remember the state of these controls, I create kind of different paradigm from regular procedural programming. It's called a finite state automaton, or FSA, also known as a finite state machine. And to handle this, I create a FSA class called tree finite state machine, and then I have a doorway method into this class from the controls called invoke tree finite state automata. And all 3 controls go through this doorway method, and in fact we'll have other things that go through this doorway method later on when we're writing the actual code that interfaces with the database. And the names of the 3 controls are rad location, rad genre, and checkbox seen or unseen, which really represent the state of the data we want to look at. We either want to look at it by location, where it's stored, or we want to look at it by genre, the type of movie, or we want to look at it by one of those 2 criteria that are unseen. It's either seen or unseen. Well, the first thing we need to do is drag over a group box to panel 1. And the reason for that is radio buttons are mutually exclusive, and who's in the group of the mutually exclusive radio buttons is defined by their closest container. So we need a container to contain the radio buttons and make them the mutually exclusive group. So let's go over and give this a meaningful name, like GRP select by. And meaningful text like select by. And then drag over the first radio button. Which is rad location. Give it a text of location. And a meaningful Hungarian notation name of rad location. Rad for radio button. And then drag over another radio button. And give it a name of rad genre. And a text as genre. And then we need a checkbox. And a text of unseen, in case we only want to look for movies that we haven't seen already, like we want to watch something new. And give this a meaningful name of CHK unseen. That makes it distinguished from combo boxes, which I use CBX. I've been using CBX before, but let's tighten this up a bit. And we still want this fairly wide because this is going to be pretty wide in the next video where we're going to add a tree view to this pane. So let's double click on the form to go into the form load event. And the first thing we have to do is go up to project and do add class. One of the ways you can add class. And give this an external name of tree finite state machine, which will also create a class of the same name. So we come up here. I'll just directly add this code from the clipboard. And notice one thing we do is we get an error on the radio button and the checkbox that get past the state changed. And that's because we need to put in a using. System dot, oops, why didn't that work? System dot Windows dot forms, and you see now the radio buttons are recognized and so on. That gets put automatically into the form 1 when you create the main form. And you see here we have our main functions. I have a constructor that initializes the state of two variables, tree FSM state and tree FSM previous state. And we need a previous state because it's very important to know whether the state is changed. It doesn't make much difference for this code, which is really just subroutine code where I'm not putting in the actual code that interfaces with the database. But later on, when we're dealing with the actual code, it'll be important. So we need to initialize both those variables. And the other private variable that we have is str SQL, which eventually will be returning actual SQL, but for this test program just returns a message that says we're in this state. And we have 6 state variables. 4 of them are really the active states. The location all state, which is basically when you have location radio button selected and the unseen unchecked. So you want all the location listed. And this is the second is location unseen state, which only lists locations where you have unseen movies. And the same thing with genre, a genre all state and a genre unseen state. And then these 2 states are really used for initialization, so the machine will work right. They're what gets put into the constructor. And then we have a state we're not using at all right now, or a method called getState. And then one of the main methods is state changed, which passes the radio buttons and the checkbox and looks to see whether the radio button is checked and whether the unseen checkbox is checked. And based on those 4 possible states, it returns a FSA location, or it assigns an FSA location to tree FSM state. And the 4 states, of course, are location unseen, location all, genre unseen, and genre all. So based on the condition of those controls, it'll set those states. And it's mainly a Boolean function, so it checks to see if the current state that we just got from looking at the controls is a new state. It's different from the FSM previous state. And if it isn't different, it returns false. It says the state hasn't changed. And if it is different, it returns true. And for this program, it's always going to return true, because we're only calling it when we change a control. And then we have the get SQL state, which in the next few videos is going to actually return SQL for querying the database. But for our test to see that the interface is working right, we just return the state name that it's currently in to check that it's getting the right state for what the variables are set. And finally, there's a function called location state, which basically returns true if it's one of the two location states, location all or location unseen, and returns false if it's not. So we know if it's not, it's going to be one of the two genre states, which once again isn't useful for this subroutine program, but it's going to be very useful when we're actually running code querying the database. Now we need to add a global variable that references the tree finite state machine class we just created, and then instantiate that class in the form load function, so our doorway method can access it. And then at the top of form main, we add our doorway method itself, which calls all three of the major functions, but just does so in a subroutine way to make sure the interface works right and we're getting the right state based on the state of the three controls we're looking at. And now we're going to do an event handler for the location button. And this says if the location button is checked, call the invoke tree finite state automaton function, and then create an event handler for the genre button, which similarly says if the genre button is checked, call the invoke tree finite state automaton function, and finally create an event handler for the unseen checkbox, which calls the invoke tree finite state automaton function every time, which we want it every time because we want to change the state whether we're checking or unchecking it. Actually, the main reason to put the if radio button is checked if statement is to prevent it from being called twice, because both these radio buttons get called every time you change a button. One gets called because it's changing to unchecked, and the other gets called because it's changing to checked. So this makes sure it only gets called once, although it actually won't hurt anything if it gets called twice, the way the code is set up. Well, if we compile and run this code, go to the listing tab page and click location, you see it says we're in location all state, which is right because the location radio button is checked and the unseen is unchecked. And it says this is one of the location states, which is that second check to see if it's one of the two. That actually doesn't make sense why we're doing it right now, but it will in the next couple of videos. And then if we click genre, it says we're in the genre all state, and it's one of the genre states. And if we click unseen, it says we're in the genre unseen state, which is right, genre is checked and unseen is checked, and it's one of the genre states. And if we click location again, we're in location unseen state, which the location is checked and unseen is checked, so that's right. And it says this is one of the location states. So the interface is working right, which is really important. That way we don't have to worry about the interface when we get into the more complicated code that's actually querying the database. We know our FSA is working correctly for handling those controls. Well, I hope you enjoyed this video and learned a lot, and I'd appreciate it if you'd subscribe.